hello everyone who joined to us online. As you know, this event is a part of Live International Book Forum Festival with partnership with Ukrainian Cultural Fund and Embassy of Argentina Republic in Ukraine. And I want to introduce our special guest of our event. This is Dr. Alberto Manguel, a novelist, a translator, an editor, and the person who live in world of literature, who live in world of books. And Dr. Manguel, I want to say that this is such an honor to speak with you, to have this conversation, to have this talk. And this is a big honor for Book Forum, for Ukrainian readers, and for me in particular. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, it's an honor to be here. I would like to thank the Book Forum for the invitation, and especially the Argentinian ambassador, Mrs. Mikusinski, for the honor to be here amongst you. I have a particular attachment to Ukraine, both as Canadian, you know that Canada is 1/3 Ukrainian, and also as director, ex-director of the National Library of Argentina. When I was there in 2017, and we found out that the Russian government had closed down the Ukrainian library in Moscow and arrested the director, Natalia Sharina, the National Library of Argentina stands against censorship, stands for the freedom of thought. So we opened a Ukrainian library in the National Library of Argentina, and in the presence of the Ukrainian ambassador to Argentina, we inaugurated that library with donations from different Ukrainian institutions around the world, many from Canada. So I'm very pleased to be here and to honor the Ukraine and Ukrainian literature and the Ukrainian people who so bravely are fighting to remain independent.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Manguel, thank you so much for this word and for this support and for helping. So can we start our interview?
Of course.
As you know, maybe you know that Book Forum is one of the biggest book event in Ukraine, and all the people who read in Ukraine know about Book Forum. So my first question would be about books. Dr. Manguel, I know that you have an amazing library, more than 30,000 copies, and you also travel a lot around the world. Do you take any part of your library with you on your trips? And if yes, how do you manage to travel with the books?
The question asked today is part of the past. I used to travel. I used to take some of my books. But now, because of the epidemic, we are condemned to these virtual meetings. And more, I believe that they will happen, and that if we travel, we will travel in the mind, we will travel in the books we read. But when I used to travel, of course, I would choose always some of my books to go with me. I didn't carry the 30,000. You know that a Persian vizier in the 13th century traveled with his entire library of more than 10,000 books, carried on the back of camels that were driven in alphabetical order. I don't do that either with camels or with other means of transportation. I used to choose something that would relate to the place I went to, or something I felt I would be in the mood for. So usually it was a book that I would reread. I love rereading. you know, I'm an old man now. I'm almost 73. And in my youth, I used to look for new things. Now I use to look for old things. I want the comfort of what is known. So old friends, old wine, and old books.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Among the book in your library, in that 30,000 copies, how many of them have you already read or are still planning to read, considering you may have new editions all the time?
Books have infinite patience. They wait for us. And if we lead a long enough life, we will read many of them. But to have books is not the same as to read books. I love collecting books. I love to be surrounded with books, to live in a library. But of course, I haven't read them all, and I won't read them all. Jorge Luis Borges, in a beautiful poem that he attributes to a Uruguayan poet, he says, in the shelves of my library, there is one book, I am seeing it now, that I have closed until the end of time. So you don't read every book in the same way that you don't become friends with every person you meet. But I feel that it's important that these books be there because I don't know when I might open one and one will offer itself to me.
I think a lot of readers understand you because the buy of books and read of books is a different things, and I know it as well. Dr. Manguel, I realize that often I divide my life experience in two categories: experience from everyday life and experience from the books I read. That split is probably 50-50 for me. What was the most important experience or lessons to learn from the books for you?
I don't think I divide my life in that way. I am always reading, and the experience of life, of real life, concrete material life, has always come to me through books. As a child, I discovered travel, I discovered love, I discovered friendship, I discovered death through the stories that I read in books, so that when these things happen to me, I will have the words to name them. I suppose, I hope that when I reach my last page and I am about to die, I will have the words of Tolstoy, of Proust, to give me the idea of what is happening and put it into words. But the most important experience that has come to me through books, I would be hard put to name just one. I would say that there are certain books that have accompanied me my whole life. And because books change and become the mirrors of who you are, there are certain books that have changed with me since my childhood up to now. One is Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is my autobiography. I went through everything that Alice went through, and I'm going through it now in this extraordinary voyage into this fantastic world that we live in and that Alice visited. I think that one of the most striking moments in a book is when you come to a page and you think, but this is happening to me now. Now with the epidemic, with the coronavirus, I revisited Robinson Crusoe, who is the example of this isolation we live in. or I read Camus' The Plague, because we are in a state of plague. And there are so many more that respond to my experience today.
Thank you. Thank you for the great answer. And my next question would be about favorite books. You told a little bit about your favorite books in previous answers, but the question that some books often make a great effect to people, and they'd like to get back to those books, like to special familiar places. Do you have the book which you like to come back to and which have had a similar impact on you? If so, can you name some of them?
I reread very often Don Quixote. I reread King Lear, Shakespeare. I reread the poems of St. John of the Cross. And of course, like you, Roman, I reread Borges. I know that you became very interested in Borges and you named a magazine after his Library of Babel.
Yeah, my publishing house.
Okay, well, I think we all should revisit Borges because he has something to tell us every time on every page. The Library of Babel is very interesting to read in the context of the internet. This library that is full of nonsense. It has everything, but to find what you want requires generations and generations. I feel the same thing about the internet, and now with the fake news and all this absurdity that is coming up in the electronic media. But also, I was thinking recently that there is one story by Borges that foreshadows much of what is happening now in revisionist history, like now Stalin is a good person and Rosas in Argentina, the bloody tyrant, has given his name to a subway station. Maybe it's the way to hell. Maybe that's why they named it that way. But Borges has a story called Utopia of a Man Who Is Tired. And in that utopia, Borges visits the future and he finds many things. And one of the things he finds are huge buildings that they tell him there are cremation ovens because people are not buried. And his guide says, yes, they were invented by a philanthropist called Adolf Hitler. So Borges knew that at some point we would tell history upside down, and the tyrants and torturers and evil people of the past will become, in our crazy modern mythology, heroes and beneficial figures. And this is happening. This is happening today. And Borges saw that.
He was the genius, and I absolutely agree with you that we need to reread all that massive books, all that massive authors like Borges, like Cervantes, and all another. But Dr. Manguel, all the authors you named in the authors of past, do you have modern authors you like?
Yes. Oh, yes, very much. You know, after the military dictatorship in Argentina, the literary scene blossomed. And there are so many young writers in Argentina that I admire very much. Daniel Muslip, Eduardo Berti, Gabriela Cabezón Cámara, Samantha Schweblin, and I could go on because there is a whole library of new voices after the terrible episode of the military dictatorship that reclaim the voice of freedom to speak with an imagination that's different. And I follow these writers very carefully.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this recommendation of Argentina authors, modern authors. Dr. Manguel, my next question is an author-to-author questions, because you are a novelist, and so I'm very curious about. Have you even thought while reading a book, this is the book I would like to write?
Oh, yes, many times. Yes, it's the contrary of Schadenfreude. It's, you know, with Schadenfreude, you become happy when something bad happens to others. But when you read a book you admire and love, you feel the contrary. You feel happiness because this person has succeeded in doing something that you might want to do. And I felt that, for instance, reading the books of an author, an Argentinian author who is of my generation, a little older, Edgardo Kosarinsky. He was one of the most brilliant writers in the Spanish language. And I, many times reading Edgardo Kosarinsky, one book in particular I will recommend to you, The Bride of Odessa. It's translated into English. I thought, oh, if I could write a book like this.
And my next question is about library. You were a director of National Library of Argentina. And what do you think is the role of library in a modern world, especially now when most of information can be accessed for technical devices?
A library now, but also in the time of Alexandria, was never exclusively dedicated to one technology. In Alexandria, there were papyrus scrolls, there were stone stelae, there were codexes, there were different ways of putting down the text. And there were atlases, and there were globes, and there were statues. Rather than the word library, the word mediathèque in French, or mediateca in Spanish, is more precise in defining the role of a library. A library has to contain all technologies. A library should not be exclusionary in any sense. And a modern library, of course, has to have the electronic technology. When I was at the National Library, I tried very hard to raise funds to digitize more books, especially because Argentina is a very vast country, and the National Library has to serve not only the people of Buenos Aires, but the people of the provinces who have no direct or easy access to those books. So the digital versions of those books facilitate the access of readers. I think that a modern library, a library today, perhaps more than in the past, has three important functions, principal functions. One is to be the memory of the society that has created it, so that its citizens can remember through the texts what happened, what might happen, learn lessons from the past to use in the future. The second is to give those people their identity. The library, especially a national library, represents the identity of the country. You want to know who you are? Well, you go and see what has been written, what has been put down as experience, and then you will recognize that there is something unique in the Ukrainian identity, in the Argentinian identity, that is not exclusionary. This is something that Borges believed in. To be Argentinian or to be Ukrainian is not to be out of the world, but on the contrary, to have a presence in the world and to claim ancestry with Aristotle, with Shakespeare, with Tolstoy. The third, and this is very, very important today, and I want to stress this very strongly. We live in a time of disinformation. We live in a time where fake news and any kind of gossip story and conspiracy theories abound, and they are made popular through the electronic media. The electronic media is not to blame. You can't blame a knife if you use it to murder someone and not to spread butter on the bread. So this disinformation leads to a further responsibility of the library. The library has to be the place of evidence. If you want to know whether something is true or not, if you want to know certain facts, if you want to have information about something that's being said, the library is the place to go. The library will give you that information. So memory, identity, and evidence, those are the three characteristics of a good library.
Dr. Manguel, thank you for this words, because for me, the library is one of the most important place in my life. I like to be around the shelves with the books. I like to work in the reading hall in the library, and it's really too hard for me now when all the library in Ukraine closed by the half of the year, and I wait when all the libraries opened in Ukraine.
Well, libraries promise their own resurrection. The Library of Alexandria disappeared and is now resurrected as a new Library of Alexandria. And if I can give you a personal example, my library was set up in France in a beautiful village, and it was paradise. But the nature of paradise is that you have to lose it. Paradise, it's always paradise lost. So I have to leave my house in France and pack my books, and they stayed for 5 years in boxes. But now a miracle happened. The city of Lisbon has offered me to set up my library in Lisbon as a center for the research of the history of reading. And so my books will come out of their tombs, they will be resurrected to the sound of trumpets, and I will settle in Lisbon and live there, I hope, for the rest of my life.
Amazing story, Dr. Manguel. And I have one more question about libraries. Do you have a favorite library or libraries in the world? If so, why has it become your favorite? Is it the books or overall feel?
I have many favorite libraries in the world. When I traveled, the first thing I would do if I got to a new place was visit the library. And if I had come to Kiev, I would immediately have gone to see your libraries. But if I had to choose, I wouldn't choose the wonderful libraries of the world, the Bibliothèque Nationale in France, or the National Library of Spain, or the Huntington Library in the States, all libraries that I love. I would choose a very small library in Argentina, in Tierra del Fuego. It's called the Library of the End of the World, and it contains a small collection of travel books and maps, and it is almost at the edge of the continent. So I feel in that library that it is giving me confidence in the human intellect, that even at the edge of the world, we can have books, and we can read, and we can have a library.
Yeah, and we can have all this fantastic and emotional stories inside the books, even of the end of the world, the great story.
What you know, how can you not love a library that's called La Biblioteca del Fin del Mundo, the library of the end of the world?
It's like a music for the earth.
Absolutely.
Dr. Manguel, we were mentioned Jorge Luis Borges, and my next question about him. I'm a publisher here in Ukraine, and my publishing house is called the Library of Babel, after one of the Borges stories. So I couldn't resist but ask, what is Borges like in your memories?
I met Borges as an adolescent. I was working in a bookstore, and he came to that bookstore to buy books. And he was blind, so he would ask everyone to come and read to him. And I was one of the many hundreds of readers who came to his house to read what he wanted. And I had the privilege to listen to him talk about reading, because the comments that you or I would make and make a note in our books, he would make them out loud. And he would ask me sometimes to write them on the end paper pages of the book. And I had that privilege in my adolescence to listen to the immense intelligence and immense generosity of this man. He had an extraordinary sense of humor. He did not suffer stupidity easily. He was very timid. I think most of the time he was unhappy because he never found a corresponding love. He never found a woman who would give him the intellectual companionship, what Shakespeare calls the marriage of true minds. And so he was very lonely. He had only one friend, a true friend in the world, who was the novelist Adolfo Bioy Casares, wonderful man. But the rest of the world was for him an exchange of comments on reading, comments on books. And I think that he was most of the time unhappy. And he said in a poem, I have failed the duty to be happy.
It's sad to hear it, that the great Borges have that sad inside him. But this is a life, and this is a part of life story. And my next question is also about writer, and it's Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco said, a book is a fragile creature. It suffers the wear of time. What is your take on this thought? Do you think the book can become unimportant for next generation?
Well, Eco is completely wrong. That's a silly statement. In the Archaeological Museum of Naples, between two plaques of glass are the fragments of a papyrus found in Pompeii that lay buried under the mud and lava for centuries, and you can still read the words. If that is not immortality, I don't know what is.
You know, Dr. Manguel, sometimes I hear thoughts that the reading is disappearing because the books is not such important for people. We have a lot of technology where we can to get all that information, and I hear it 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and then I thought that no, these people who think that reading and books disappeared, they disappeared because the man is have not much of years, and with books will be everything okay.
It's a very old complaint. The book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible makes the same complaint, that of the making of books there is no end, indicating that you can't read all the books and readers are failing. We have always complained about the lack of readers. But since the beginning of the written word, readers have always been a very small proportion of society. Readers belong to an elite, but it is an elite to which everyone can belong, except that people are afraid to become readers in the real sense of the word. But books have not disappeared. Books change with technology because the technology changes, but they become presented in a different way and remain essentially the same. Reading Homer on the screen, for those who read on the screen, is another experience of the same text. And so reading will disappear when we disappear, which I think will not be long, as the scientists tell us. We have gone beyond the limit date where we can change our habits. We haven't changed our habits. In fact, it's getting worse, especially in North America and that monstrous regime that the unnameable president of the United States has created. And we are on a suicide course. And maybe books might teach us how to prevent falling off the cliff. But right now we are at the edge of the cliff, and I think we will continue to read when we are giving that last jump into the abyss.
Dr. Mangel, do you use ebook devices? And how do you feel about these tools as an equivalent of printed publications?
For those readers who like them, who enjoy them, who can use them, especially the young readers, but there are many older readers, it's perfect. But I like the printed book, and it's familiar to me, and I know how to use it, and I feel too old to develop new habits. And I have a prejudice, and it's really a prejudice against virtual relationships. I love to talk to you on screen, but I would much prefer to sit with you in a cafe and drink a glass of wine and continue the conversation. So in the same way that I'm not convinced by virtual sex, I'm not convinced by virtual books. And I will remain with my printed books until my last day.
Totally agree, because for me is the same. I like the printed book. I like how them smell, how I feel all of them in my hands, how I throughout the pages, and it's such a pleasure. Stories and all that feelings you have after the books, after the print book. Dr. Manguel, which of new technologies do you consider useful, and which ones do you think are excessive for modern humanity?
Oh, no, there is no technology that's excessive for humanity. We can misuse a technology. As I said before, the knife is one of the most perfect inventions, but if we use it instead of to butter a piece of bread to murder someone, it is we who are guilty, not the knife. If you invent the wheel and you use it for transportation, it is a great invention. Or in a mill, it is a great invention, a new technology. But if you use it to bind a person and torture the person on the wheel, then it is a misuse of that technology. And the same with the electronic technology. The electronic technology has helped revolutions around the world. Well, the Orange Revolution or the Arab Spring would never have happened without that technology. But on the other hand, now that group of mad people in the States, that the QAnon, who believe in conspiracies and satanic rites and so on, are using that technology to misinform. And Russia is using that technology to destroy democracies around the world. So it's not the fault of the technology. They are very, very useful instruments. We cannot now do without them, but we have to learn to use them prudently and establish some limits to what can be done with them.
In the great thought, Dr. Manguel, it's like the nuclear bomb is not danger. Danger is the people who can, the man who can push on the red button. And
now we have madmen with the red button.
Yeah.
But two madmen.
Yeah. Dr. Manguel, are you generally an optimist or a pessimist when you think about the future of the world?
When I read the newspaper every morning, I'm a pessimist. When I see my granddaughters, I'm an optimist.
Wow, great, great. Like the William Golding said, sometimes someone, I'm a pessimist, but I'm a optimist in the
general sense.
In general, yeah, in general, when I see in the future.
Yeah, well, I don't see the future, but I see my granddaughters, and I have to be optimistic when I see them.
It's a great story. You are a novelist, a translator, an editor, and you have many other roles in the world of literature. Which one would you say is your favorite?
To be a reader.
Great, great.
Borges said something that's very true, and that you as a writer and a reader will recognize, Roman. He said, a writer writes what he can, but a reader reads what he wants.
Dr. Manguel, it's really the same for me. Sometimes I said that all I do every day, I do it, forget the time for reading. You know, yes. I do some my publishing stuff and other stuff for get the money for living and for have the time for reading the books.
Absolutely.
Dr. Mangel, beside the book and literature, what other cultural influences are important to you? Cinema, theater, music?
Oh, yes, of course. Cinema, theater, music, dance, cooking, architecture.
Can you name some of your favorite, I don't know, cinema directors?
I can name some of my favorite directors, and I can name some of my favorite films. The Argentinian Lucrecia Martel is one of my favorite directors. Fellini, Bergman, Saget Ray. And then some films that for me are absolutely fundamental for my imaginary landscape. The Argentinian film La Historia Oficial, the official story, and a wonderful film that came from Madagascar, of all places, called Timbuktu. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it.
Thank you for this recommendation. Dr. Manguel, if you were asked to give some guidance to young people who just started reading books and develop interesting for literature, what would the guide be, and what would be the starting point?
I would never give guidance. I think it's an impertinence to guide anyone. I would tell them that they have to discover their passion, they have to discover their authors, they have to discover their books, and they have to discover if they are readers or not, and if they want to be readers or not. But I can't do that for them in the same way that I can't get them to fall in love.
Dr. Mangel, you mentioned your granddaughters, and if someday your granddaughter asks, Grandpa, recommend me some books, I want to read some books with adventure, and what will be that book?
I would take her into a bookstore and tell her to look for herself.
It's a great decision. Dr. Mangel,
recommendations and guidance can go wrong and can be the beginning of fascism.
Dr. Mangel, what do you imagine the future of the book is?
I imagine that it will be much the same as it is now and has always been. There are some passionate readers, some good readers, there are some people who are frightened of reading, and good books will continue to be produced and forgotten and rediscovered, and this will go on till we are no longer on this earth.
Dr. Mangel, thank you very much for your answers. Maybe for the end, what you wish for Ukrainians, for Ukrainian readers, for people who watch us online, for our viewers?
I wish courage, I wish you health, I wish you persistence, and I wish that you will have the strength not to forget that you are free people, free of thought, free of word, with a wonderful language of your own and a wonderful culture and literature of your own that will feed the world as it has fed it up to now and will feed it in the future.
Thank you, Dr. Mangel. I want to thank you for this opportunity to hear all that great thoughts and to have this great interview, great conversation. Thank you to agreeing to be a part of Book Forum, to be a special guest of Book Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I hope that in the future we can meet in Ukraine, IFK, away from keyboard, away from our screens, in real life, and to drink a tea, a coffee, or wine, and talk about libraries, about books, and about readings.
I hope that very much.
Thank you very much.